What's up, y'all? It's GC Kinsey, here with a little visual metaphor to help explain gender fluidity. I talk a lot about gender in my videos, but one thing I have not really gone too far in depth on is my gender fluidity. And just to explain where that fits in with my gender overall, starting at the broadest level and getting more and more specific, I'm transgender. The way in which I'm transgender is non-binary. The way in which I'm non-binary is gender fluid, fluctuating in a space between transmasculine and genderqueer. So I use any and all of those words to describe myself, sometimes on their own, sometimes in combination. And another word I often use is genderful, meaning I literally feel like I'm full of gender. Put a pin in that one because it's going to be relevant later. But the word I want to focus on for this video is gender fluid. And just in case you're unfamiliar, gender fluid means that your gender shifts and fluctuates rather than staying in a single fixed state. There are a lot of misconceptions about gender fluidity, but I think one of the biggest ones is just how much variety there is in the way it works, and how different each gender fluid person's experience can be. So I have something here that I hope can make all of this a little easier to understand. Actual gender fluid. A lot of people think gender fluidity works like this. You're a man some days, and you're a woman other days, and you sort of just keep flipping back and forth between them. And for some gender fluid people, that's absolutely true. But that's not how it works for all of us, or I would even argue for most of us. Maybe you are a woman some days and a man other days, but also, maybe you're a combination of both. And that combination might look like two distinct colors in the same glass, or they might be all swirled up and mixed together. Maybe they're completely blended into a whole new color. And that might be how your gender fluctuates. It doesn't flip back and forth between blue and pink, but instead it's just shifting shades of purple. Sometimes it's a warmer shade, other times it's a cooler shade. But it keeps moving around in a purple spectrum between those pink and blue endpoints, and maybe it never actually reaches either one of them. And I hope that makes sense as a starting point, because now we're gonna get a little more complicated, and talk about how you could be gender fluid in a way that isn't related to manhood or womanhood at all. And this is really getting into the nuance of non-binary gender itself. A lot of people think it's referring to that spectrum of purple between the pink and the blue. But non-binary genders can exist entirely outside of that as well, and they can come in all sorts of different shades and colors. Or even no color at all if you don't have a gender. So if you're gender fluid, you might fluctuate between being a man and being genderqueer, or being a woman and being agender, or between being bigender and being a non-binary gender that's completely unique to you. The possibilities are literally endless. And just like we saw with the pink and blue colors before, you might be any color combination of these non-binary colors as well. You might be some mix or swirl or a shifting series of shades. I also want to point out that there's no specific time frame in which your fluctuations or your shifts in gender might occur. I think the stereotypical view is that you're a different gender every day when you wake up, and again, for some people that is true. But for others, those fluctuations might happen less often, maybe every few days or even every few weeks or months or longer. Or they might happen more often, like multiple times in the same day. And maybe those fluctuations in gender are very big and sudden and feel like a yo-yo going back and forth. Or maybe they're more subtle and gradual. Maybe you can tell what direction your gender is moving in and where it will end up next. Maybe it's completely unpredictable and you don't have a clue. Maybe the shifts in your gender are situational, like a response to the environment or a social situation you're in. Maybe your gender feels like it's always in motion and never settles in one particular place. The point is, the variety is huge. So now I want to show you how this feels for me personally, to explain what I meant earlier when I said that my gender fluctuates in a space between transmasculine and genderqueer. So first, let's get a visual for transmasculine, which for me is just like being a non-binary guy, basically. To represent that, I'm going to use a blue like we used to represent men earlier, but with a little touch of green to make it more of a teal shade of blue. So definitely still masculine, but not quite a binary guy. And I'm gonna keep the orange I used earlier to represent genderqueer, which for me describes being non-binary in a very fabulous way that's hard to define in terms of either masculine or feminine. Most of the time, my gender is a mix of both of these colors, shifting in some shade between those two endpoints. And these shifts in shade feel pretty subtle to me. I think because if I had to plot masculine and genderqueer on a three-dimensional graph somewhere, those 2 points would feel pretty close together for me. When I first started questioning my gender and realizing I was gender fluid, those shifts did feel bigger to me, and I conceived of them as fitting more within this space, somewhere in that purple zone between masculine and feminine. Sometimes with a little shot of that genderqueer orange in there too, just for gender feelings that were hard to define any other way. But over time, I came to understand that what I had thought of as femininity was really more like fabulosity, and I have another video you can check out that explains how I figured out the difference. And once I did, that's when I understood that my gender fluidity existed in this space rather than in this space. And remember how I said to put a pin in the word genderful for later? Well, this is why. My gender always feels like a very full glass. Not only with lots of colors in there, but also just lots of gender in general. It feels like a cup full of liquid that's always sloshing around and threatening to spill over. It's pretty much the opposite of how I've heard agender folks describe their lack of gender or strong gender feelings. Another important realization I had about the way my gender fluidity works is that even though my gender isn't static, it still is non-binary at all times. No matter where it fluctuates between transmasculine and genderqueer, no matter whether it's more teal or orange or a balanced mix of both, it is still very much a non-binary gender. And that was true even when I thought my gender was shifting more between masculine and feminine rather than masculine and genderqueer. I never felt like a binary man or a binary woman, and I never felt like I was shifting between being cis and trans, being my assigned gender and a different one. I always felt non-binary, just in different ways and to different degrees. I tend to compare it to how the ocean is always salt water, but sometimes that water is calm, sometimes it's choppy and full of rip currents, sometimes it's got big rolling breakers that surfers can catch, and the tides are always changing. And, it's water, so it's literally fluid, just like this, which is honestly how my gender fluctuations feel, like moving water. I hope this visual metaphor helped you understand gender fluidity a little bit better and maybe debunked some misunderstandings or stereotypes about it. And now I want to turn the conversation over to you. If you're gender fluid, how does it work for you? What kind of metaphor would you use to explain it to other people? How do people misunderstand or misinterpret your gender fluidity? And whether you're gender fluid or not, what questions do you have about all this? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I have more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, along with cosplay music videos, makeup tutorials, pre-testosterone voice recordings, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. I hope you learned a lot of new stuff about gender fluidity, and I will see you on the next one.